Talks on the End of Life, a series of public forums on how to handle the challenges of aging and the final days. Number 4 in the series, Elder Law and Care, sponsored by St. Barnabas Episcopal Church with Hospice of Cincinnati.
Thank you. I'm going to go first. Excuse me, I'm Janet Pecquet, the lawyer. And mostly what I do is I help people who need help with how to pay for long-term care. So most of my clients are relatives, spouses, family members, friends, caregivers of people who need or are in long-term care or are going to need long-term care, either in the home or nursing facilities. Most of my clients excuse me, are living in nursing facilities because there's not a lot of home care that covers that level of care in the home that's affordable. And I help figure out how do you pay for it, which involves mostly getting Medicaid, the Medicaid program to pay for care in that type of setting. And our clients range from age birth, all the way through, we have someone who just passed away, I think she was 108 or something. So there's a large range of ages. We usually see people as an emergency. This is how the call comes in. My mom just got discharged from the hospital and she's going over to Twin Lakes over here for skilled rehab. What do I do? Or the other common scenario is my mom just got cut from Medicare Part A at Twin Lakes. What do I do? She's going to be private pay tomorrow. So it's usually an emergency in that sense of the word. And we sometimes feel like a MASH unit when in that situation there are 2 lawyers. I'm one of them, and then Ashley Shannon Burke. She's the other lawyer in our group, and we have a licensed social worker who works with us, Ann Wilker. She's got many years of experience working in long-term care in that setting in a nursing facility as an admissions counselor and then as just a social worker. And she's been working with us for about 8 years, I guess, now. And so all of that involves when a client comes in, we go through everything. What is their situation? What assets do they own? How are those assets titled? What needs to be done with them? Who has the power to do that? And what is the end result? So, for example, you mentioned your husband had dementia or Alzheimer's, so I'm assuming he must have been in some care setting or might have been.
The last 2 years he was.
Okay, and so that's a typical client for us. And you would come in and we would go through, we would make a plan. How do you afford that care? Because not very many people can afford a nursing home at $300 a day. Most assisted living facilities, if there's dementia involved, they may or may not be able to handle that. If the person needs a locked unit, there's not that many assisted living facilities that are locked or that are covered by a government assistance program. They're not covered by Medicare for sure, and they might be covered by Medicaid under a special program, but it's limited. So that's what we go through. And if it's earlier in the planning, let's say that you have a diagnosis of MS, and you're 50 years old, and you know that eventually...
Say what that is for some people.
Oh, multiple sclerosis. So, or Parkinson's, and you're younger, but you know that eventually you're going to probably end up in care. So what should you do? How do you plan for that? If you're married, should you get divorced? Should you put everything in your children's names? So we go through all of that. There are very technical rules about that. There's a handout that sort of goes through that, some of the rules, but it's something that sort of like, don't try this at home. So you don't want to do it on your own. I mean, yes, if you hire us, it's going to cost some money, but you're going to make sure that it's done right, and if you give your assets away, there are some pretty serious consequences, unless there are exceptions to that. For example, for Medicaid, you can transfer anything to your spouse. There's no penalty for that. People will say, well, what about that 5-year rule, that 5-year look back? This is one of those things that you hear myths and allegations, like I guess Paul Simon sang that in one of his songs on the Graceland album, Myths and Allegations. So it's sort of like that, you know. Oh, my neighbor was talking to me and they said you can't do anything for 5 years. Well, that's not really true. So it's a complicated rule. You can give assets to your spouse. You can give assets to a child who is on disability if you have an adult child and they receive Social Security disability. If they receive supplemental security income, for example, for a mental health disorder, then by giving them assets yourself, you might disrupt their benefits. So there's layers of complexity here. One of the other things we look at is, do you have authority to act? A lot of people have power of attorney. You should have one. Everyone here should have one. A power of attorney document that authorizes someone to handle your finances if you are not available or if you can't. You're on a trip to Italy. We took a trip together to Italy. And so if you're on a trip to Italy and you need something done suddenly, then your attorney, in fact, can act for you. So everybody should have it, not just people who have diagnosis of some need for care. Anyone 18 or older. So if you have children who are college age, get their power of attorney. Healthcare power of attorney, you should have that also. And that's only in effect if you can't give medical consent, but you still want someone to be able to deal with your physicians and your care providers if you're not able to give consent. Let's say you're in a car accident and you need someone to be able to talk to the doctor. You know they're not going to talk to you under those HIPAA rules unless you have that healthcare power of attorney. So sometimes physicians will talk to you if you're the spouse without those documents, but it's better to have them. So we go through and make sure, that everything's in order. And our power of attorney, if you have a chronic care need, we want our power of attorney has things that most power of attorney documents don't have. For example, it gives the authority to make gifts of unlimited amounts to unlimited people, including the attorney, the power of attorney. That allows a spouse to change the beneficiary designation for her husband, or to transfer the real estate into her name if the husband is no longer capable of signing a deed. Without that unlimited gifting authority, you're not going to be able to do that. And so that's something, another thing that we look at. So we also look at the estate plan. So if your spouse has care needs and you know that, you want to make sure that if you predecease, everything is you would probably prefer that everything go to someone beside your spouse. For example, your children. So we make sure the will is changed, the deed to the house is changed, everything is titled so that it will pass outside of probate. And another little thing you probably don't know, some of you may have trusts. You may have these living trusts that it's a great estate planning tool. But for Medicaid purposes, it may not be so great. If your house is titled in a trust, in a living trust, and you need Medicaid for nursing home, they're going to count that house against you. They're going to count it as an asset. Whereas if it's just in your name as an individual, they don't count it as an asset. So that's one of the technical rules that we don't, most estate planning attorneys don't know that. And they go to, you might go to your lawyer for, my spouse is going to have to need care, what do I do? And so they put everything in a trust, not realizing that putting that house in a trust is really the opposite of what you should be doing. So So that's what we do. We also appeal long-term care insurance denials. Or let's say that you have a long-term care insurance policy and your spouse is in assisted living and they say, oh, that's not nursing home, we're not going to cover that. Well, we appeal those, and we've had some litigation around that issue, a couple of different class actions against a couple of the companies. And so it just depends on what the language of the policy is, and don't just walk away from that and assume that the insurance company is correct. Have somebody look at it if that happens to you. We also do long-term disability insurance appeals. So if you can't work anymore and you have a private disability insurance policy and they're saying that, well, you're not really disabled, don't walk away from that either. Have somebody look at it. The worst that can happen is you're going to be in the same position you're in before you go see someone, so have somebody check it out. I don't think that the current Affordable Care Act, it doesn't change any of the requirements for Medicaid for nursing home care or long-term care. So it doesn't really address any of the long-term care issues. It doesn't really change Medicare, so you don't have to worry about that. It might have some impact on special needs coverage if individuals who are younger who have disabilities might be able to get coverage through the Affordable Care Act that they can't get now, but Medicaid pretty much covers what those individuals need. So yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Jan.
Okay. Thank you again for having us here this afternoon. It was really nice to discover that Peter Walzer and Kathy that I would see them both, because I've known Kathy for a long, long time, and she was kind of a mentor, someone I looked up to when I started a job in the mental health field a long time ago. So it's good to be here. I am a geriatric care manager, and that's a relatively new term, a relatively new profession. It's only about 30 years old. There is a national professional association called, get ready for this, it's a real, National Association for Professional Geriatric Care Managers. Now I know that sounds like too dull, but it's a fabulous organization. Because when I conceived of wanting to do this just over 15 years ago, I started talking to people about how I could get started and how I could do this, and I discovered that this professional association already existed. The home office is in Tucson, Arizona. There are over 2,000 members across the country, and I happen to be a certified member, and last year I was elected to the national board. So it's a place for a lot of education, and you can get just a huge amount of information and resources. There's also a website that you might want to jot down associated with this organization. It's called www.caremanager.org. It's singular. And this website gives you access to a lot of information, and it's by an objective source. And one of the services that it has is a Find a Care Manager locator, and you can find care managers across the country. I frequently get calls from people saying, do you know anybody who does this in Chicago or San Diego or New York or Charlotte or lots of different parts of the country. And this directory is a good help, and actually by going to the professional meetings and that sort of thing, I often do know someone, so it's a big help. Describing what a care manager does can be a little difficult because it's a very broad, you're smiling, you must have heard this before. It's a very broad definition. We manage care, we coordinate care, we locate care, we advocate for people, we help get people to the right resources. It's kind of, when I was describing this to a friend of mine, she said, oh, You're like a professional daughter. And that describes it much better, don't you think? You do all those things and more. You do the laundry, you check the refrigerator to make sure there's not expired food in it, you just do everything. So we do all that as a profession. One of the areas that we do a lot of, I have a staff of several people who work with me, and we represent local and out-of-town families. So, especially in this day and age of smaller families and mobile families, many people do not have any in-town family. But they've discovered, that something's going on and they want to be sure everything's okay. Maybe mom or dad can still manage, but there's the potential for things going wrong or maybe somebody's memory's starting to slip or there's something going on. And to just have a local person to be able to stop in once a week and keep an eye on that, people describe as very, very comforting. I've worked with people who really had minimal need up until their death, years later sometimes. And what we do is we help families, we identify for families decisions that need to be made. We alert them when we think a level of care needs to be raised, that kind of thing. Some families can come in often, maybe every couple months, and they're very hands-on. Others cannot do that. So that's one area where we help. Another one is we advocate for clients. A geriatrician from St. Louis, whose name I don't remember, said he thought it was next to criminal to allow somebody over 85 years old to go to the doctor by himself or herself. And I thought, well, that was really an interesting way to look at it, because you know how difficult it is, especially if you're the one who's having trouble, to remember everything that the person said. And so you have somebody who can go along, take notes, email those or call the family and let them know, what was said. So that's another thing we do. And we advocate for clients when they're in the hospital, to the extent that we can. And when we can't, we call people like Janet and say, okay, now they need to hear from an attorney. But there are all kinds of things that happen, and you need an advocate. If you're not feeling well or just have another person look at the situation, it's incredibly helpful. The same is true in care settings. Studies have shown for a long time in all different kinds of care settings that people receive better care if somebody else is keeping an eye on things. And so we're a person who can do that. We conduct personalized assessments when people want that. We're very flexible. We can be more consultative. If a family just wants to meet with us and talk about the possibilities, and they have a number of people who can really carry it out and provide all the care, we're very happy to do those, to meet with people under those circumstances. Or we can be more hands-on and coordinate the care for the family. We design a plan of care and offer consultation. We look at everything from daily routine, memory, driving issues, is the person taking their medication appropriately? Do they need help going to the doctor? Are they a major fall risk? Are they paying their bills? Do they have the documents in place like a power of attorney, medical power of attorney? The advance directives? Do they need to see an elder law attorney? Do they have a physician who's tuning into their needs? Do they need to see a specialist? What are their wishes, end-of-life wishes, if that's appropriate? And we are often in the situation of helping to advocate for that. We work very closely with hospice. We have, out of about 30 clients that we're working with right now, I would say we probably have 4 who are active with hospice. Hospice of Cincinnati particularly. We help people control costs. Our service there's a cost to that also. It's a private service. But if you look at the cost of care in a facility, and if we can help you figure out how to delay facility placement, for example, for 2 months or 6 months, you can buy a whole lot of geriatric care management services for the amount that you would save there. We also do not come into this with the notion that everybody needs eventually facility care. Sometimes it's a progression, sometimes it's a continuum of care, but not always. And we look at the individual and we talk to the family. We don't have our own agenda here. We want to know what the individual wants and what the family wants. Some people do well in facilities, some people do not. For example, sometimes people who were executives or who have, I have to be careful how I present this, but no, nor physicians, Peter, of course not. They're our favorite clients. Right. But so you try and get them to change their routine or suggest that maybe they need some help. Well, sometimes that's a really difficult suggestion to make. Whereas if you're working with somebody who maybe served others and had a lot of bosses or something their whole lives, they might be a little bit more amenable. So, so some folks will do well transitioning to a facility and some people will not. And we look at that and we know the facilities around town and we try to match that also to the person's needs. People who have visited a variety of facilities know that, for example, one memory care unit is not the same as another, or one nursing unit is not the same as another. They're very different, and we're very fortunate in this community to be so service rich, I think, because there are a lot of options available, but then it's incumbent upon us to know what those facilities are. We help people transition to alternative housing if that's what seems to be the best alternative. We screen, arrange, and monitor in-home services. We spend a lot of time doing that because when the person chooses to stay at home, that can be difficult to manage. It depends on what the needs are exactly and what they aren't. I mean, it's introducing care when you first start to bring care into the home can be a really difficult time, and we view it and strategize with the family around this about, we almost view it like a sales situation. How can we present this care so that it's most likely to be accepted, so that the person's most likely to end up with the care that he or she needs? And it's often not by saying, you're having trouble with this and this and this, and I'm going to bring in somebody who's going to help you with that. That's a good way to get thrown out. But if a person is more likely to accept a driver, somebody who's going to do cleaning, a companion, maybe they go out to lunch for the first time, it's much easier to accept somebody coming by who's not listing a litany of things that the person needs help with. And sometimes, especially when it's memory loss, a person that can accept that much more readily. We provide crisis intervention, probably not quite as frequently as what sounds like Janet gets, but for example, over Christmas, family will come to town and visit, and they haven't been here for sometimes a very short period of time, but maybe since last Christmas or for 6 months, and they just never realized from the telephone conversations or the email or the other types of communication just how much the person had slipped. And maybe the person recognizes they need care, or maybe they don't, but maybe the son or daughter has to leave and go back to work the next day, and this is really an unsafe environment. So we help figure out how to manage that. So how long have I been going on here? Okay, I think those are basically the services we provide. We work with the other services in the community. There are a few other care managers in the city, and you can find those listed on the national website. So do people have questions at this point? Yes?
What is the cost for someone to contact you and to initially get your service?
It depends on the service. My rate is $90 an hour, including all time spent. And that's for the care coordination, the consultations and the care management, not for providing care in your home. Providing care in your home, the going rate for that tends to be about $20 an hour, depending on who you get. Sometimes people can find it a little less if they can find it privately.
You have to deal with hospitals or now healthcare networks. Has that been a change in terms of services rendered or who renders them, and particularly in the home? Because I mean, with all of the changes in health insurance and so on, you know, all the doc's offices are being bought out, so they're not exactly in charge all the time. They need to be, but somebody else is probably has the final say if it's matter of money and stuff like that. So I wonder how your practice has changed, say, in the last, and how your interaction with medical care systems goes.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody is under the gun to do things quickly. And with the penalties that have been put in place for rehospitalizations and that kind of thing, there are a lot of special programs that are going in place. So basically, when one of our clients goes to the hospital, we make sure we go with them, we find out what's going on, because they're doing the discharge planning, and I probably, unless this is an incredibly healthy group with incredibly healthy acquaintances, you know that once a person goes to the hospital, the discharge planning is already in place. And there's somebody that's trying to get you out before you really get settled in for that first night. So we just keep our pulse on that, find out what the discharge issues are, whether they're going to be in any of these special programs. A lot of people still have family doctors, but it's becoming more and more difficult. They're likely to know the person less well, and as you said, to have less control. They're the hospitalists in the hospitals, and so that. Do people know what I mean by the hospitalists? Yeah, if you've had. Right. So
what is that?
So that your family doctor is not likely, your primary care physician is not likely to be the one who follows you in the hospital. It's likely to be a hospitalist, which is a physician employed by the hospital. And that person, they work at the hospital all day long. And so they may or may not be in touch with your physician. Peter, were you going to add something to that?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about this and what couple of the other sessions, but I mean, it is a real problem. So if you have, let's say Grandpa, Grandpa we have some what we call the Marchie bunker, and so Grandpa was a World War II vet. Grandma was like Edith, a sweet person, generally deferential to Grandpa, but a very shrewd person as far as what needed. So when something happened there, sometimes it might happen very quickly. The children are often not in town. They're 100,000 miles. Yeah. but I mean, there's real issues. I'm trying to think of a scenario how you would do that. So I mean, maybe something happens. Grandpa has a heart attack, or fall, or something like that. So how would you take over from there? So, and then you have the children from out of town who may disagree totally about the management. And so how would you give us a scenario how you would mediate that?
The family with a lot of people who disagree, that's a whole presentation.
Okay.
And that's definitely a group we work with. Okay. Yeah. I'm from a big family. When my mother went to the hospital, there were 9 of us. We're all calling. And finally a nurse said to my older sister, "You people have to stop calling so we can care for your mother."
Yeah.
So there is that. But when it's a big, complicated family, we discuss that. Okay, how are we going to communicate? Do you really want to be paying me all day long to reply to all, on the latest email? So who's going to be in charge, and what are they in charge of, and how are we going to best coordinate that? And for some families that works fairly well. Some families you're always kind of working with that. Now, the other part of your question about when people are in the hospital, and I mean, we work with the caregivers in the situation to notify us immediately if the person goes to the hospital. And so we try to get over there so that we're talking to the people and to the discharge, the nurses, and in the ER, the nurses, so that we're part of the discharge planning. And that, we're there saying, they say, okay, well, you've got a caregiver, so we can just send them home. No, this caregiver is not skilled to do this or this or this. So, you just have to be aggressive and present.
And so recently there's been some things in the media with caregiving where someone goes into the hospital and they're maybe 3 days and they think that, they don't owe anything, they have Medicare, and then they find out later that...
The observation status?
The observation.
Yeah, I can talk about that. There was a lawsuit filed.
I call them. It's like...
Yeah, there was a class action filed to address that, and actually the court ruled against the plaintiffs and said that the Secretary of the Health and Human Services, Medicare, Medicaid Services, Center for Medicaid, could restrict coverage for someone who was in the hospital but not officially admitted. So this is how it happens. Your parent goes to the emergency room. They're kept a couple days, but they're never really actually admitted. Then they go to a skilled nursing home and for rehab. They don't qualify for Medicare Part A to cover that rehab because you have to have a 3-day inpatient hospital stay in the hospital. And so not only do you lose the hospital coverage because you've not been admitted, you're there on observation status, you don't get your skilled Part A coverage, so you can be out. And so the plaintiffs in that lawsuit, the facts were pretty strenuous, I felt, that because, for example, there was one plaintiff that had been on this observation status for 5 days, but they were never officially admitted. So who would think, well, I haven't been admitted? Nobody thinks to ask that question. So if you have somebody go into the hospital, you want to make sure they're admitted. Have they been admitted? And get them admitted so that they can get that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
What constitutes admission? Going out of the emergency room and up into a room?
No,
Or-
it's somebody,
So in other words, you only know it if they choose to tell you.
Or you ask.
or you
Yeah.
ask, yeah. So that was a pretty shocking court decision. Because the Medicare statute refers specifically to admission as a criteria, and these people had not been admitted. I think that there's an effort to get that term defined a little better, so there's a presumption that if you're there more than a 24-hour basis, that you would be deemed to be admitted, but that's not currently the rule. There's another Medicare rule that was recently changed, and for the good. So I guess you take one step forward and one step back, and this is the step forward. So if you've ever had a family member in a nursing home under Medicare Part A, you know that probably have heard this. Well, they're not showing improvement. They're not showing improvement anymore, or they've plateaued. So we're going to cut their Medicare Part A. So that standard was never really in the law to begin with. It was just in the Medicare manual that the government puts out. It's not in the law. So that was another lawsuit that was brought to challenge that. It was a nationwide class action that was certified and resulted in a settlement. So now that standard no longer, it really never did exist, but now it really no longer exists. So now it's really not there. So that's kind of funny, but anyway. So the correct standard is whether you need the rehab to maintain where you are or to prevent you from going backwards. So with the way that would work in real life. For example, my mother she had a need for skilled care. She was admitted to the hospital but she did meet that criteria. She went into skilled nursing. She had rehab there. If she, under this new rule, didn't show improvement, she would have been cut. But this new rule requires that they continue to provide Part A coverage to prevent from going backwards. So she needs the therapy just to maintain her function, not necessarily getting better, but to maintain the function. And so that's a big improvement. And this settlement it's about a year old, I think, and they're just now starting to educate facilities. So we still hear that all the time. Oh, they're cutting because they're not improving. Well, that's not valid. And so we actually sent letters out to all the nursing homes in our 5-county area, just informing them of this settlement, letting them know that that's not a valid reason to cut someone. And we've gotten some response from that, more from an advocacy standpoint, because we just wanted to, let people know that that was not a valid standard. And now if you know anyone who's been subject to that rule, or if any of your loved ones have, they're going to re-review people who were cut and didn't get coverage. So you might be able to get that coverage even if it's a couple years ago. So that's a good thing. That was a positive development.
So Janet, does that mean that the patient would then stay skilled?
They'd stay skilled.
So the family wouldn't have to pay for room and board under that scenario?
Right, and thanks for bringing up the practical consequence of that, is that under Part A, you're covered, under Medicare Part A, if you're in a skilled nursing facility and you otherwise meet the rule, you get your stay covered, your room and board, up to 20 days in full, and then there's a copay day 21 through 100. So the most you can get is 100 days. Yeah, and that copay is a couple hundred a day. I think it's maybe 150 or something a day, which, I mean, it's a lot, but still, yes.
Let me go in a different direction. Can you talk about how your respective positions could help families deal with end-of-life discussions with the persons who are in that situation? Are there aspects of what you provide that help in that discussion?
Yes, I mean, end of life discussions can come up at a lot of points. I just had a family who never wanted to discuss hospice. They likewise did not want to discuss any kind of end of life type situation. They didn't want to acknowledge it. And it was really to the point where the person was really miserable, and she needed the kind of care that a hospice organization would provide. And so it finally got to the point where, with them, we started discussing the actual services that they would provide. And hospices, I think, have gotten better or more flexible, or they've been able to do this, so that depending on the situation, they don't always have to use the hospice word, for example. And Janet, you might want to make some comments about that. But what I did in that situation was essentially pave the way for the family to start using hospice services, met with them and hospice together to get that started, and then continued to work with hospice as they entered that service. It doesn't always work, and so sometimes, there are more palliative care programs and a whole concept of slow medicine that is sometimes available now short of hospice. But, there are a lot of advantages to going the hospice route, but that's not for everyone. And
from the legal perspective, what we would do is make sure that when you pass away, your assets go to the people you want them to go to in the most efficient manner possible. And we walk through the probate process, and whether you want to do that or want to have your assets pay on death or put in a trust or transfer them before you pass away to someone else. So we go through all that, make sure that your plans are, that your wishes will be followed through. And hospice care is paid for by both Medicare and Medicaid.
Completely.
Yeah, so it's a covered benefit. Yeah.
I have a friend, and her father is paralyzed and half paralyzed and blind. And the mother just recently went in the hospital. The mother was caring for him, but now the family has stepped in. But my concern is if they need in-home care, is that covered at all by Medicaid or Medicare? And also, who can she go to for help? Are there people like you in hospitals that can advise her and her family what to do if the mom can no longer care for them?
Well, in-home care, there's Medicare Part B.
Okay,
Provides some home health. You have to have a need for skilled care.
right.
So if there's no need for the skilled care they're not going to, Medicare just won't pay for someone to come help you bathe. But if you have a need for skilled coverage, like having a bandage check or a wound check or medication administration or evaluation, you can get the aid assistance with it.
Okay.
Medicaid pays for home care through a program called Passport, which is a Medicaid program of nursing home services in the home. And that's administered through the Council on Aging. They also have in Hamilton County the Elderly Services Program that provides in-home services, but not to the extent of 24/7.
Okay.
These are maybe somebody grocery shopping,
Right.
medical transportation, 24-hour emergency response unit, Meals on Wheels. Maybe somebody would come in and do some homemaking, clean your house, give you a bath, but it's not going to be 24/7. There is a program called PACE. Can't remember what that stands for, All-Inclusive Program for the Elderly or something like that, but it's through TriHealth Senior Link. And they have an on-site, it's sort of like you go to the nursing home during the day, Medicaid pays for that, and then you go home at night.
Oh, okay.
So there's, and we have that here in Hamilton County. That's not statewide. So it would depend on where this person lives.
I have a couple of questions.
I think Jan might, yeah.
Well, I was going to make one more comment on the observation status. If you or a loved one ever is in the hospital, just ask what your status is. And it's not always a negative outcome. I was personally involved professionally in one kind of horror story around this, but it had a good ending. And I didn't know much about it at the time. It was new. And so I started just asking my usual questions. And then finally I called an elder law attorney who had been working with the family and asked what to do. And so when I called the weekend social worker discharge planner back and said, this is just not acceptable and their attorney will be contacting you Monday morning, I got a call back and said, oh, he's been declared admitted. He's considered medically necessary, whatever it was. So, don't just accept it.
That actually was one of my questions. I had a friend who just went through this with a parent who was in observation for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And they were admitted. And
Here in Cincinnati?
Hospitals that are being evaluated on readmissions.
Right.
Maybe don't want to admit somebody if they don't have to, because then they don't have to worry about it.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
My question was, what kind of pressure do you exert? Hospital says, no, we're not going to admit them yet, they're observation. I guess you have to call a lawyer, you have to call an attorney then to get them admitted?
I don't know. I know our professional association has sent position papers, and we, at our last conference, we had a meeting with some people from Washington on this very topic. And most people are sympathetic. There was one person on the panel who was, no, this is what we're supposed to be doing, is, denying services. But at any rate, I know.
It's all about saving money.
Yeah.
Yes, it is all about.
Well, they could bill full boat if it's observation, whatever the time is in hospital is not covered by
It's not covered.
care, so you got to ante up. And
But one of the questions that's always on your side, I think, is why. They say, no, well, she can go home. He can't care for himself. I mean, they're much harder pressed to discharge somebody, I think. Maybe I'd say things that aren't true.
We don't
but-
see that many of these because we usually see, they're usually, yeah.
But if you say she can't stand, she can't get to the bathroom, she can't eat, she can't prepare her, if you say some tangible things like that you know are life-threatening, and they're on record and say, please make note of that, please make sure the doctor knows that she can't get to the bathroom without falling, and I can't stay there all night, I'm working, she doesn't have anybody to help her do that, then it's much harder for them to do that.
The second question involves the question about assisted living or in-home care. Assuming you have long-term care insurance which covers some of that, what's the process for putting that in place? Does a doctor or someone have to notify the insurance company? Does the insurance company then notify home care? Do they have certain contracts with certain home care providers? How do you make that work?
Well, that long-term care insurance policy is a contract between you and the insurance company. So the first thing to do is to get out that document and look at it, and then call the number for if there's a number. If it's an old policy, let's say it was issued in the 90s, early 90s, or late 80s, when a lot of assisted living didn't really exist back then. You might need to Google to find out who, because some of those policies have been sold from one company to another. So you might need to find out who the current owner is, what company owns it, and start with a phone call and ask them that question. How do we submit a claim? Usually there's a form. They'll fax a form to your doctor or mail it to your house. There's usually a process. And the interesting thing that I think it's interesting is that many of these companies hire third-party administrators to administer the claims. So you think you're talking to John Hancock, but you're really talking to this other company called Univada or Univita that is designed to save John Hancock money. So they're under contract with John Hancock to save money, which, what does that mean? Deny claims. So I shouldn't say that so aggressively, but we're in a,
Facts
are there any of you out there that work for that company now?
But if they know that you know what you're talking about, sometimes it's not that difficult. It's usually a matter, you have to get the physician's signature and qualify it based on a couple things.
Yeah, and those policies, especially if they're old, they might define the nursing home in a way that includes assisted living. So that assisted living, even though it's not licensed as a nursing home, it falls under that definition and should be part of the covered benefit. But if the insurance company says, oh, you're in assisted living, we're not going to cover you, don't take no for an answer, at least initially. Maybe if somebody looked at it, they'd say, well, here it says it has to be licensed as a nursing facility. Well, that's different. But if it doesn't require a licensure, specific licensure, and instead it's some kind of like, if you need hands-on assistance with 2 activities of daily living and the facility provides that, well, that's assisted living. If that's how that's defined as nursing home in the policy, it should be covered. And they also, a lot of these policies have these alternate plan of care, that provide a lower benefit, maybe pay out at 80% of the nursing home daily benefit, or it's up to the company to decide whether they're going to accept that, and they don't. Traditionally we'll say, no, we don't give you an alternate plan of care for assisted living if there's a nursing home within 30-mile radius. Don't take that
I think it's maybe 4 o'clock.
One more question over here.
Well, he's had his hand up for a while, too.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe 2 more? What did he
Dan,
say?
this is for you. In listening to you describe earlier what you do, it seems like you've taken out a lot of tasks for a client, and a professional lawyer can only go so far. Are there more than one of you where you work? Or?
She's got clones.
Well, it's my business. I own the business. I have several people. We don't do all of this for all clients. Each client tells us what he or she wants.
And she's excellent, by the way. I don't refer people to anyone else. She does an excellent job, and
That's a great
she started. I had worked in the public sector, nonprofit, legal sector for a long time, and then when I went to Beckman, Weil, shortly after, she started her company. So we hooked up, and so she does a great job. Yep. You had a question.
Yeah, on the radio recently, there's more and more advertising of in-house services, franchised.
What
has your experience been on the quality of it?
Talking about.
Like
Like visiting nurses.
visiting angels, and all the they're franchises. Yeah, I think it just depends on the individual franchisee, I guess is the word. Yeah.
They're not, I mean, a new one starts every week. We're always getting calls from them wanting to meet with us. I mean, it's sort of a love-hate relationship with them. You know, they're only as good as the caregiver at your door.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some agencies that we prefer, and some we don't, which I can't sit here and say that, of course. But, I mean, I can't list them, but.
Yeah. And
Private
word of
Medicare.
mouth, get referrals from your people
Right.
you know who have gone through this. That's really, for lawyers too, I mean, that's the best way to find out who should you go see that knows what they're doing. Talk to people. Talk to your friends and relatives and people, like you asked the question about how the hospital discharge. Nursing homes will give you names of, if you need an elder care attorney, they'll give you names of lawyers that do this work. So that's, other lawyers, maybe your family attorney, ask them. Yeah, Janet.
Janet, I have a question regarding Medicare and when Medicaid kicks in. So is Medicaid automatically available to us if we run out of assets and we run out of Medicare, meaning that it's, we don't have any reason, we're not skilled. Medicare doesn't necessarily pay for room and board in the nursing home. If we run out of money, can we assume that Medicaid will pick up the tab?
If you're in a nursing facility and you need that level of care, you have to need the level of care. Your income has to be less than the cost of care per month, which usually it is. And your assets, if you're single, there's a lot of rules that impact this. So the single asset limit is $1,500. For married couples, it's much higher. And there's a lot of things that aren't considered assets for that criteria. And the facility accepts Medicaid. 95% of them do. There are a few in our area that don't. You can find out if they do at Nursing Home Compare website, which is a Medicare website, and that also has the ratings, which is the Medicare inspects. They inspect through the Department of Health there, so the facility has to have an agreement with the government to accept Medicaid. So
the best, if you have questions, you really probably do need an attorney to help you through that.
I think so.
I mean, you can assume that it'll pay for it.
Right.
But the application process is not easy,
And it takes a long.
and you have to apply. And
It does,
can-
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we do that for you. We
right,
do
they're
that,
specialists,
yeah.
very, very good ones.
Well, look, why don't we stop the formal thing, and then if people want to ask questions, I'm sure you'll be able to.
Okay, great.
And we won't charge you by